Hello, friends, and welcome to Mindful Mutiny. Today, I do an interview with Dr. Andrew Del Rossi. In this conversation, Dr. Del Rossi is a theologian. He is a person who studies the ancient texts and the more contemporary texts of religion and Catholicism and the world. And his insights are ones that have practical application for you and your mental health and your life. This discussion is an amazing discussion about how ancient principles actually do relate to your life. Enjoy today's Mindful Mutiny. Welcome to the Mindful Mutiny podcast. I'm Jeremy, and I founded Mindful Mutiny as a podcast, a community, and a commitment to live a high-frequency life. I want to help you cultivate purpose, clarity, and structure. I'm an experienced therapist, transformational coach, former executive, and psychedelic specialist. Go to mindfulmutiny.com to subscribe to my newsletter, schedule a consultation, or just to get more information about what my coaching can do for you. If you support positivity, I'd be honored to have you as a Patreon subscriber. On Patreon, there will be bonus material and a community of Mindful Mutiny fans that believe in human potential and living a high-value life. Also, check out the link in the description for my spring store with merchandise that supports the Mindful Mutiny podcast. Mindful Mutiny is sponsored by Exponential Intelligence. Exponential Intelligence teaches you how to raise your consciousness and be the most wise, evolved, and brilliant version of yourself. See the link in the description of this podcast to learn more about this incredible sponsor. Mindful Mutiny is also sponsored by Pachamama Sacred Paths. Pachamama's mission is to facilitate individual awakening through sacred plant medicine, spiritual retreats, and ancient teachings, ultimately contributing to the collective ascension of consciousness. With over a decade of experience hosting retreats, Pachamama is distinguished by its commitment to ancient wisdom, shamanic practice, and ethical care for participants. See the link in the description of this podcast to learn more about this incredible sponsor. And now, on to the show. Welcome, Dr. Andrew Del Rossi, to the Mindful Mutiny program. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Jeremy, for having me.
Dr. Andrew Del Rossi is a theologian with a deep passion for integrating spirituality and psychology. He earned his doctorate in theology with a concentration in Christian spirituality from La Salle University. Dr. Del Rossi is the director of the Spirituality Center for Dalesford Abbey in Pennsylvania. His experience spans teaching theology, directing campus ministry, and leading service immersion programs alongside work in small business and holistic therapies. A dedicated scholar and speaker, Dr. Del Rossi serves on the board of the American Teilhard Association and edits Teilhard Perspective, contributing to the ongoing dialogue on spirituality, psychology, and new cosmology. And I do believe that I mispronounced that word. It is Teilhard. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. Thank you so much. We even talked about it before. And I wanted to just kind of start by getting a sense of what it is that you do. Can you talk about what a director of spirituality is in your university?
Sure. Thank you, Jeremy. So in my role here at Dalesford Abbey, we are an abbey, which is similar to a monastery. When people ask what is the nature of the building you work in, I usually just say by default it is a monastery because that kind of rings more relevant to people than an abbey. But basically, the abbey is home to 19 Norbertine priests, so they're Roman Catholic priests. It's a specific order of Catholic priests who live here, and they call this abbey home. And attached to the abbey is this beautiful retreat center. So the abbey is on almost 90 acres of the Chester County countryside here in the greater Philadelphia area. And we have a nice retreat center where my job in running that retreat center is to serve as a liaison, number one, between the Norbertine community who calls this home and all the guests that we welcome here, and then to do the job of coordinating the different groups that are coming in. We have big group retreats that we host. We have individual private retreatants that will come in just to spend some time in solitude here. We have a long list of programs that we offer throughout the different seasons during the year. And my job is kind of the linchpin within all of those and pulling the strings and pressing the buttons to make the events here happen. Gratefully, on top of that, I have the opportunity to serve in the capacities that I went to school for in terms of spirituality and being able to offer retreats and programs myself. So, as much as my job is administrative, it's very much hands-on and pastoral as well, where I'm really getting to and be involved with people and their spiritual growth.
Do you have to be a Catholic in order to go to a retreat there, or is it other organizations and churches that rent the space to have the time?
Good question. So, no, you don't need to be Catholic to come on a retreat here. The Abbey has always been known as a very inclusive space without needing to brand itself as such, which I really appreciate it about it. All of the groups that we host here are nonprofits in some ways, so 501(c)(3) organizations. So it's a variety of groups to actual church groups where they are of different Catholic churches and then different Christian denominations. So we say we're a very ecumenical space in that way. We have a lot of high schools that come here. And then we have a lot of other nonprofit groups like 12-step groups, for example, that use our space.
Hmm. Hmm. Available, honestly, and this is really kind of a sad thing in our civilization today, is that the space that the retreat, the church, it's not a city center anymore. It's we have a society that is not community oriented, and there tends to be less of an emphasis on coming together, being mindful, being prayerful, being thoughtful, being introspective, taking the time to be silent or to fast or to pray. And so it's almost like, and I hate to say this because I find it to be rather sad, it harkens back to a time when that was indeed more important, and perhaps we would be going in a better direction as a civilization if there was more of this.
Yeah, I mean, it speaks to the initial purpose of abbeys and monasteries. They're supposed to be this changeless place within a constantly changing world. And obviously, we do need to keep up with evolution to some extent, where there are these small changes that happen over time. But one of the learning curves, I would say, that I've really needed to embrace in my 5 years that I've been here, going on over 5 years now, is a real sense of how slow that change can be sometimes, especially when it is in a communal aspect. Like I said, we have 19 priests that live here that call this place home. So it's, community life is challenging where you have 19 different opinions that often are not in agreement with one another. So yeah, it speaks to that dynamic, but it also is, the positive side of that, where you look at all the fruits that can come from a more contemplative, intentional way of living. You look at the ministries that have budded and grown from the prayer life of the priests and the different people who have participated in this community throughout the years. To piggyback on your earlier question on do you need to be Catholic to be a member here at the Abbey or to go on a retreat, there's even a lay contingent of people, meaning they're not professed religious, who still do make a yearly promise to follow certain guidelines, if you will, when it comes to spiritual growth in terms of service and having a ministry, in terms of regular practice of worship with the community. So the Abbey has always been seen, like I said, as this inclusive center for people who are looking to develop their spirituality. And going back to the 1960s, when the Catholic Church had its big change with Vatican II, it was one of the earliest communities, at least in this area, excuse me, in the greater Philadelphia area, to start really adopting those changes, which were leaning towards a more universal church, which are leaning towards a more universal call to holiness, which basically says that you don't need to have a collar on and be a priest, or, have a veil on and be a nun in order to be seen as a holy person. Everyone, no matter who you are, no matter how much of a sinner you realize or don't realize you are called to holiness and have that. I like to say, because holiness is a word that can be convoluted at times, you have that goodness within you.
I kind of want to like expand on that a little bit because, certainly the robes, the collar, the nun, it connotes a certain authority. Now, I'm
Hmm.
going to use the term authority because I know that it's not necessarily how it is seen from within.
Mm.
These are spaces of service. These are people um, uh, these are serving people. These are people who not necessarily are supposed to have great authority over people, but certainly they hold a space of direction, I guess.
Mhm.
But what you're talking about is just the very nature of that spiritual specialness within every single person, whether they wear a robe or whether they, are just a regular person going to work right now and listening to this on their car radio. Can you talk about that relationship that you have seen the Catholic Church have with the individual that doesn't necessarily seem to get through a lot to people?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a challenging one, Jeremy. That's something that I struggle with on the daily, especially still working within the Catholic institution here. It is supposed to be a position of service, of the type of kingship that we see within the scripture. Particularly, I'm thinking of someone like a King David who was there on the front lines in terms of fighting with his people, weeping with his people, dancing with his people. He's an artist. He's more than just a ruler wielding power and authority. So that's really what the priest or the clergy within the church is called to be. Pope Francis has this great line where he says, shepherds should smell like sheep. And too often, in my experience, unfortunately, the priest or the clergy, the religious, have, I don't know if it's a conscious choice to drift this way or if it's all of the unconscious forces of, yes, father, yes, sister, their entire life, where it just becomes this staff of power that they wield to say, because I said so. That's like one end of the spectrum where I've had negative experiences, and I've had, I would say, more experiences on the opposite end of the spectrum where it is this real example of servant leadership and where you do have someone who is really leading in a selfless and spirit-filled way. They're open to the workings of the universe beyond just their narrow mind and ego, and even the narrow vision and ego of the community at times too. Um, I would say that one of the real challenges the Catholic Church faces nowadays is within its age demographics and how the majority of the religious, the priests and the nuns, they're really up there in age. And there is a need for vocations, but there is a lack in relevance where it's just not resonating with that demographic that they would hope to be recruiting from, right? So I think that that unconsciously, that generation gap unconsciously plays into that drift towards more authoritative power and wield or authoritative wielding of that power rather than a more servant-minded led implementation of those things. Um, so I don't know if that answers your question. It's more of my personal struggle, but it's something that I'm commiserating with more and more people with about now. They're kind of like realizing like, like this is what you've been talking about. And me personally, it's something I'm just starting to become really conscious of now as to put words to it and to be able to dialogue about it, where it's not just this latent frustration or anger or chip on my shoulder that I have against someone because they wear a collar or go by a certain title, right? It's taken me a number of years to really work through this. And yeah, hopefully that brings some light to your question there.
A long time ago, I was in an evangelical uh, uh, band. We were a worship band for a local Christian church, and I was the drummer. And we were asked to come and play at a Catholic church for a youth event. And none of us had ever attended a Catholic church. We thought, wow, a youth event. This sounds really great. We put together a set of music that was loud and up and really rocking and everything. And so we walk in, we set all of our stuff up, and it's a very different kind of church and everything. And all of these old folks start coming in. And the youth event was little Susie playing the flute with her mom, accompanying on the piano, and things. The youth were the performers for older folks that were in the neighborhood and were like, "Oh my gosh, we're at the wrong gig. This is a very different thing." And of course, we pretty much cleared the whole place with our music. All the walkers were getting up and making for the door when we started playing. But it was just a very different thing than what many younger people tend to be kind of going towards. But I do believe there is such a, we were filling the place with noise, just a
Hmm.
lot of noise, and you can't you it's a different kind of worship.
Hmm.
It's definitely not solitude. It's
Right.
definitely not deep reflective prayer. It's it's part performance, part celebration kind of thing. It's just a very different kind of I guess worship style,
Sure.
you know. No.
Yeah, and you're seeing that evolution within the Catholic Church too, where the different music ministries are trying new things to see if that might enliven the congregations. It's a regionally diverse phenomenon too, where in the Northeast, where I'm located in Pennsylvania, we're seeing churches merge, meaning they're not strong enough on their own to sustain, so they need to link up with other churches, usually because of financial reasons, in order to, be able to go on. And then you're also seeing churches and schools, Catholic schools, and even Catholic hospitals too, just Catholic institutions, period. You see them closing down or being bought out by bigger institutions.
Yeah.
While in states like Texas, you have churches and schools that are opening, starting new parishes, right? Then that goes into like the ethnic influxes within the church and whatnot. So there are so many factors, but it's this really interesting time because we are just approaching so much new knowledge, I feel like, and that's played such a rich history within the Catholic Church, its intellectual tradition. It has such a strong foundation upon philosophy. It really prides itself upon that. That it will be interesting, in my perspective as a theologian, to see how we adapt in order to survive. If you look at just Catholic colleges, they're small colleges in general are having a real hard time at sustaining themselves nowadays. But there are so many small Catholic colleges that are facing enrollment issues that they're needing to close. And I think that when it comes to even like higher education, for example, over the next 50 years, it's going to be really interesting to see what creative steps these smaller institutions have done to survive and thrive. And I think it goes back to your point of intentionality, community, authentic spirituality, of finding really what holds us together at our core so that it can have a resonance with people and be relevant.
Well, I want to get into this part of it, and it's your theological study. You've spent a lifetime really putting together things that have made you really unique and renowned. And I know it can be difficult to, make a particular summary of this. I've read some of your work, comparing and contrasting different historical theologians and philosophers. Can you talk about the way that you have approached your theological study and what it is that your focus actually is?
Thanks. Yeah. So the focus of my theological study really was a personal search at first, and it still very much is. But when someone asked me that question, oh, I forget how many years ago, like, why did you start studying theology? My instinct of a response was just to say, it's what I needed to do to survive. Like, it helped my life. It helped me put meaning to this somewhat meaningless or seemingly meaningless process that we're a part of at times. But basically, I was in my, let's see, or senior year of undergraduate studies in college, and I had some freedom with my schedule, and I decided that, religion's always been interesting to me. I was raised a cradle Catholic, so a typical Catholic upbringing, and I was at that juncture in my early 20s where I was really starting to question, well, what do these beliefs mean? What do I make of them? What is faith? What is God? Like, what is this whole thing really about? Doing some soul searching. And I just decided to pick up a second major at that point because I had the time and availability with my schedule to do that kind of thing and studied religions. And that was just the title of the major was just, major in religions, not religious studies or theology or anything like that. So, that rolled into eventually a master's degree when I was working at the time out of college, just realizing how bored I was doing the work I was doing. and realizing how much of a desire I had to continue to go down the rabbit hole, so to speak. And that's really what theology was. It was this continual peeling back of the onion for me to discover these layers both within myself as well as within the world. So I think that goes back to my point of it being, a matter of survival, a matter of life and death in a way for me, because I was really lacking that anchor at a time where I could take what was most important to me and find a very practical way to live that out in the world. Um, so I rolled that undergraduate degree eventually into a master's program. About 6 months later, I enrolled into a master's program and just continued to study that track. And over the course of that, like in the hero's journey of Joseph Campbell, you decide to answer that call, you open the door, you meet a mentor, and they are very instrumental in guiding you along that path. So I met a number of great mentors, one of which, fortunate enough now to call a good friend. His name is Dr. Thomas Leger, and he himself has a background in theology and spirituality as well as psychology. So he was really instrumental in showing me how there was a place where these two paths could connect. And I just really started to lean into that by finding the work of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. So Teilhard was a priest, he was a paleontologist, he had this mystic vision of a future where through evolution, not just the planet and not just the human person, but the entire universe is evolving in closer relationship with God. We are essentially becoming more conscious of the divinity within every person, within every cell, every atom, within every quark, every inch of the universe. God is present. And Teilhard tells this story of how we're evolving in a way to make God more personal, if you will. Because the more that humans evolve, we really evolve by, and this is where the spirituality or the psychology and the spirituality start to fold together, is we really evolve when we begin to go towards that higher dimension of ourself. I could use the word transcendent. That has some implications for people. Even the word higher, I've been criticized using that before. So a word that I find to be helpful is is integral, right? We're moving to that more integral dimension of ourself where we're really able to hold together the whole, our
Mm.
goodness, our shortcomings, as Jung would say, our light and our shadow. We're able to hold together in a way that says that all of this is an important part of evolution, right? My body is not just 37 years old. My body is, as far as I know, possibly 15.4 billion years old, in that all of this matter was at some point part of this cosmic journey, right? It's about realizing how important relationship is. It's realizing how important connection is. And it's not just connection with myself and the people around me, right? It starts with connection within me. And that's what really was so revelatory about Teilhard's spirituality for me, was that he found God within himself by trying to really find God in the world. He wasn't doing this searching for the divine within churches all the time. He wasn't always with like-minded people in terms of priests he was with. He was out there. He was out in the field. He was a soldier in World War One. He was doing work in the East in terms of going to the Chinese desert for a number of years. He was working in New York City. So he never really had a home in that way, especially since he was exiled from his home country of France. He literally did not have a home in that way. And that's not to say that I've felt spiritually homeless in any way, but you don't always feel like you fit in with a certain maybe verbiage that's used in a place or something, or a certain culture. But to say that I've always been searching for, and God willing, have always found my people. And I think it speaks to a more global community that we're being called to, where in some cases it's a gift to be hyper local, right? To have a group of 5, 10 people that you can meet up with locally, right? Within 20 minutes of your house or something. That's cool. But for me, it's really been this gift of being able to connect with people through the internet and find that there are these like-minded souls all around the world. And they're in the local community too, but it's really affirming to know that they're all out there.
Okay. While you've been talking, I've been just kind of knocking something around my head. I've got this nice little book that's the abbreviated version of the DSM-5, and
Mm.
I use it when I need to refresh myself on the elements that create a diagnosis, and then I have a code that I put in to my system so that I can bill for treating somebody with a psychiatric disorder like anxiety, depression, ADHD, PTSD, all the ones, right? It is a very lab rat version of what working with a human being actually is. And can you
Yeah.
talk about what you just talked about in this, um, Teilhard and Jungian version of ourselves, as integrated transcendent beings that we are trying to be? And can you talk about how the person who's out there is struggling with anxiety, loneliness, grief, can use this in their life to help them with their own functioning?
Yeah, that's what it's all about, is how we can make this stuff relatable and practical for people. And I think that there are a number of levels to approach it from, whereby you look at both of these men, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, Carl Jung. Um, I don't know their Myers-Briggs typology off the top of my head, but they lean more towards the introverted side. And I would say that that tells us a lot about the importance of solitude and the importance of silence, especially when we are trying to process big emotions, powerful events that we've gone through, be they for better or worse, right? Major life decisions, or just the general ruts that we can find ourselves getting stuck in from time to time, occasional bouts of depression, anxiety, whatnot, I would say are all normal human emotions to experience. So it's first, realizing that there is a space for silence and a space for solitude and trying to process that, and that it's also normal to feel those things. I'm sure we could have a whole nother conversation about how over medicated our society is and how we tend to just put bandages over issues that people have and not actually get to the root cause of those things. Um, but kind of like I was saying regarding, my body being much older than, my physical age in terms of my human years, we realize that, or we can realize in those spaces of solitude and silence and, lack of input from the outside world, that what we're going through too is maybe something that has built up over the years, over the generations, over the traditions, and it can make space for a realization that we are not alone for that matter. It's not just like, a one-off thing, a singular issue. I mean, it may be a result of a decision we've made, but it's about how we move forward. One of the great quotes from Jung that I'm going to paraphrase is that I'm not the result of everything that's happened to me. I am who I choose to become. And um, once one has developed the ability, or at least somewhat of had some level of comfortability of sitting in silence and can kind of get a bigger picture view of the issue, I think that makes it a little bit easier than to start working with the whole, to try and work towards those spaces of integration, those spaces of trying to connect with our higher self and higher sensibilities, higher sense of calling as a human person. Um, because our totality is not just our trauma, it's not just our anxiety, it's not just those things that hang us up. Our totality is our peak experiences too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our experiences of goodness within ourselves, within other people, how we see that mirrored in the world. So it's challenging because we're all going through this simultaneously, and we may have different needs at all times. And like, well, I'm in my role as the director of the Spirituality Center at Dalesford Abbey, I'm in through going through some personal turmoil myself, and then I have a retreatant who's coming in all prayerfully and looking to have this spiritual experience here. I really have to have the self-awareness to not be like, oh, I can't believe this issue I'm having with my vendors or whatever. Like in meeting that person, I have to be able to recognize the whole. I have to recognize the gift that I have to be in this role here, to be able in some small way serve that person, help their experience that they're having here. And then I can, maybe go back and work on my own stuff in a more appropriate way where I realize, hey, you're not the totality of this issue you're having, but you have an opportunity to serve people as well within that.
Right, right. And the work that you do, the theological work that you're doing, all this wonderful research, um, do you take this and teach this? How do you help people in a practical way with this work that you're doing? I mean, I know that you've got the retreat center. Do you do courses or teach?
Yeah, so I've done everything from retreats here where people will spend a couple days here and we'll go through some themes from maybe some of Teilhard's work or just some of these larger concepts within spirituality, psychology, cosmology. I'll do programs where I'll try and focus on a bit more of niche topics. Like, for example, something I've really been leaning into as of late has been the evolution of our spirit, of our psyche, and how the earth fits within that as well. So, for example, last year when the weather was nice, I did a program outside where we spent pretty much all of the day outside praying, a little bit of lecture, time for reflection, conversation, but really within the context and the setting of nature so that we could get a sense of how integral that is for our experience, not just spiritually, but just our human experience. Um, so yeah, I mean, I do pretty regular book studies online on Zoom, and that goes to, the point that I've found it almost easier to connect with people through the internet sometimes than locally when it comes to doing these sorts of programs. So I have a book study coming up in March that is going to start over the course of 6 weeks where we'll work through one of Teilhard's books. And I try and do them during times of the year when people are more intentional about what they are committing their time to. So coming from the Catholic Christian tradition, I'm doing this book study during the season of Lent. Season of Lent is typically seen as a time of prayer, fasting, almsgiving, and service where we are really preparing ourselves for the celebration of Easter. Um, so it's a typically more introspective, contemplative time of year. People are looking for a regular practice, and I realize that I'm looking for something regular too. And what better than to find a community of like-minded people who can journey through this time and in this case, this text together. And whenever I do a program, um, kind of like you asked me before we started, like, is there any subject matter that you don't want to talk about or anything like that? Like, my presentations are very open-ended in that I take it as a great affirmation when people ask a question about something which is kind of totally unrelated to what I talked about, but then that's an affirmation of how they were in some way able to connect it to their life. And sometimes people ask questions that really put me on the spot and put you on the hot seat in terms of like, oh, geez, how am I gonna, answer this in a politically correct way or not offend someone or something like that. And I've just been so affirmed in those instances and speaking freely and authentically how well my responses have been received. And I'm not implying that, I say off the wall things in response to their questions, but the level of dialogue that can result from an open and authentic environment, I think, um, it, it, it creates an element of mutual respect within the room where I think people see that, like, hey, you're approaching this authentically with me and trying to relate this in some way with me. You're not up here dogmatically telling me what I need to know or how I need to believe or what I need to think, but rather you're saying, let's approach this concept within the spiritual life, right? Like spiritual growth or spiritual diminishment. And let's talk about the nitty gritty of our lives that put us into that feeling of, I'm growing spiritually through this, or I think I'm, depleting in some way, or whatever the situation might be. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And it's kind of dovetail into something that I was thinking of. You talk a lot about personal transformation and what it takes to get to, and I like the term higher self. You were kind of not sure whether you wanted to use higher self or more integrated. I really like the concept of higher self, just simply because it's aspirational, and that's what we all want in our life, is to rise, to be a greater version of ourselves. Can Are there three things that you see as absolutely essential for somebody when they're looking for personal transformation, when they're trying to get there, when they're experiencing a block and they're wanting some sort of breakthrough to get to the next version of who it is that where they want to go, who they want to be? What do you think the most important three things to have in your life and to consider would be?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is humility. And if you
I'm
come
the
from
best at that.
there, but if you come from there, I think it helps keep other things in check. So humility and faith is very important, especially during those times when nothing is happening, when it doesn't seem like you're growing or progressing at all. Um, so humility, faith, and finding a way to maintain the passion of what it is that you're pursuing, be it personal growth or a relationship or a professional career or whatever it is. We become so hyper fixated at times that I have felt, at least personally, I can start to go into what I call like robot mode, where I am so hyper fixated on that thing or that concept or that um, you know, email you're waiting to hear back from someone on to advance a project or something, that I almost lose the fire for that thing in itself just because it's so contingent upon, like, well, what's next, right? And maybe what's next is within your passion, just to keep that fire burning, to keep that ball rolling, because it's easy for that fire to be extinguished within the spiritual journey, personal psycho-spiritual journey, whatever you want to call it. Because naturally there are lulls, there are doldrums when nothing is happening, when the winds are just totally still and that water is not moving at all. We see this within the story of Jesus, right? He dies, he goes into the tomb, nothing happens that Holy Saturday. Nothing at all. And then Sunday, it's like the big reveal, right? And so much of our life is spent in that Holy Saturday period where we're just in the darkness of the tomb, the darkness and the stillness, and nothing's happening. So yeah, it's to maintain a sense of humility, to maintain a strong faith in what it is that you're going after, and to find a way to keep that fire of passion burning.
Hmm. And that fire in passion is something that I know that I have struggled with in my life, and a lot of people struggle with. And so, would you say, and this is a comparative question from you do a lot of studies of history and you do a lot of studies of theology through history. Would you say that there are things about our modern civilization right now that lead to a sense of spiritual malnourishment, a sense of being disconnected from the mystical, from the spirit, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, my mind immediately goes to technology and how it just can easily usurp our attention and our energy and just really suck us into a bottomless pit of, I mean, look at the verbiage around it, doom scrolling, right? It's like what is affirming and incentivizing about that? Yet it's something that's so easy and addictive to do, right? Um, yeah, we live in an age of convenience. I don't know that things have ever been more convenient than they are now in terms of being able to order your groceries, order this or that, order a ride, you can order a flight, right? Do this all from the palm of your hand or your laptop or whatever your technology of choice is. Um, and in that, it's easy to forget the sweat equity that goes into things, I think, right? In that age of convenience and age of seamlessness, it's easy to forget that the gears do need to grind, that we do need to pound pavement, and we need to sweat it out and grind it out in order to achieve our goals, whether they be personal growth or whether they be getting a certain job or working on a project or whatever it is, right? Um, yeah, I would say that that is the main distraction there is how convenience has just made us lazy. I know that's probably a trope to some extent, but it's something that I find myself guilty of at times. Like I wake up early in the morning, for example. The early morning is my sacred time, those pre-dawn hours. There's something about waking up early where I just know that at least in my, locality, not many other people are awake at this time. And I really feel like my brain has the freedom to think. But I've also noticed how easy it is for me just like lose a half hour scrolling on my phone, and there the prayer book is sitting there untouched, and the workout mat hasn't been stepped on yet, and haven't done any sort of mindful breathing or anything, and just made that choice for whatever reason. Oh, I need to check what the weather is or something like that. Did that email come through I was waiting on? And then 20, 30 minutes later, you're gone. And that raises the question now in a lot of circles, has that become our new devotion? Right? That's the first thing I do when I wake up in the morning is I pick up that device, I swipe it open, I put in my code like I'm like blessing myself or genuflecting or something like that. And and now the scripture has been open and now I sit and contemplate that, right?
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
challenge.
Well, what's interesting about this is, when I'm asking a question, I watch the body language of my guest. And if I see a look of confusion, if I see that the person's not ready, I keep talking until I can see that the person's ready to answer the question. With that one, you were immediately like, oh, let me at this one. I know this one. I think about this one. And so, with all of your study in theology and philosophy and the work that often feels difficult to feel relevant in the modern age, if you will. Philosophy can feel like it's something that doesn't really necessarily meet our modern existence. Can you talk about a piece of the theology, a piece of the philosophy that you have maybe recently been thinking about with regard to our civilization and the way that it is? Something
Mm.
that would help people to be thinking about, maybe seeing something in a different lens as we're dealing with a civilization that is very chaotic.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much that stands out to me. And it's not even very a theological image, it's a scriptural image more than anything, but there's a whole theological tome that you could write about it, right? Many have, but is the image of the prodigal son, where there's the story of a father and gives the fortune to the son, and he goes off and squanders it and eventually realizes how empty his life is until he comes seeking this sense of restoration at home. And the father totally accepts him without question, throws a party upon his return, even though he knows how poorly and unscrupulously he spent this money and the horrible things he did with it. He still just rejoices in him coming home. And I think that really speaks to what people are craving for in terms of spiritual growth. And I'm not just talking about Catholics or Christians or Buddhists or whatever sort of denomination or religion you might ascribe to, if you ascribe to one at all, but just that sense of homecoming that people are really craving. Um, that's more of like a scriptural pastoral image. But if you want to get theological about it, which I have to because I'm just a nerd in that way, so there's this concept from really the earliest church, and it's known in the Eastern by the Eastern Fathers or the Greek Fathers as divinization, and then in the Latin Fathers in the West they come to know it as theosis. And it's this idea that God became human so that humans might become God. And that could easily be taken as heretical because, we don't become God per se in that way, but we become conscious of, we become um, conscious embodiments of the divinity within us. Now that comes along with our shadow and my temper and all of these other shortcomings that I have. But it's all held in context with this notion that we are all children of God. We are all part of this divine creation and part of our evolution, both as a planet and then as individuals, you, Jeremy, me, Andrew, everyone else in the world, is to be evolving a little bit more closer to that identity. And when I read someone like Assagioli, for example, that's where just all the bells went off of this higher self. And we could get into a bunch of hair splitting about God and higher self and Christ self, and right, like that's not what it's about. It's about the reality that we are all, again, like I started this with, part of this long, deep time history, deep journey of evolution. And for us to look at our small lives and their, at best, maybe 90 some year context, right? Like that doesn't give us the full picture. But when we look at it in the larger sense, we can see maybe how over time, if it's hard for us to see how the world is getting better, at least I think we can see how we're becoming more conscious. So the theological idea was this idea of divinization, right? Or that God became human so that humans might become God. And Teilhard talks about this in a more scientific way, where he says there is, throughout the course of evolution, from the Big Bang to the universe and wherever it's headed and whatever sort of endpoint it might have, there is this continual ascent. There is an ascent of material complexity. So things are getting more physically, more material complex. And with every ascent in material complexity, there's also an ascent in consciousness or an ascent in awareness. And a good example of this is our cell phones, for example, right? This little device here is so uber powerful that something of that scope, how many years ago, 20, 30 years ago, needed to be kept in a warehouse. And that giant machine really wasn't truthfully even able to do half the fraction of the computations that this little thing can do now, right? So there has been an evolution of the material complexity of microchips, of processors, of all the little parts and components that go into computers. And with that, there has been an evolution in the consciousness of these devices, right? This thing has all sorts of AIs on it now. It's not just, my iPhone has an AI, but, I open up Meta and that has an AI, and I open up my banking app and that has an AI, right? It's this little ecosystem of intelligences. And Teilhard saw the human person as a phenomenon because we are not just this evolution of consciousness and material complexity. I mean, yes, our prefrontal neocortex is the most densely ramified structure in the known universe, right? So that would imply material complexity. But it's the implications of consciousness and what that means. And if we are to look at the evolution of consciousness, those higher upper echelons of awareness take us into the realm of the saints and the sages, the mystics, where they talk about how all is one, reality is this interrelated and interconnected thing. And ultimately, we are then, to use a previous language, really growing in holiness. We are growing in an awareness that this divine goodness is within all things, no matter how complex, no matter how trying they may be. There is an opportunity there for growth to take those circumstances and find how it can serve evolution towards a brighter future for all humanity.
Tell me how all of this has changed your life.
When I read Teilhard Chardin, I found someone who put into words the way that I believed. Like I said, was raised a cradle Catholic, and for me, that was comforting at times, right? Because it's a preordained culture to fit into and a verbiage to use and things like that. But then it became really troublesome when I found that the way that I believed was overflowing that container, so to speak. Right? Like I hit the brim of the container and I was just like, oh, this language is so limiting for me. And I've referenced it a few times throughout our conversation today, right? Just in acknowledging that this word is a loaded word for people or this word has heavy implications, right? But I found that with Teilhard, there was such an integral approach to spirituality that it was capturing all these different facets of the way my mind just was kind of approaching these topics of faith, but he put a language to it. Like, I can't really explain quantum physics to you, but from my mental conception of what that idea is and the documentaries I've watched and classes I've took and things like that, I'll be sitting in a Catholic mass on a Sunday, listening to the words of the priest or reading, following along, and they're doing whatever they're doing in the ritual, right? And I'm having like these thoughts flood in about quantum physics and all of these mysticism, phenomenology, psychedelics, all of my experiences are like flooding into that. And then I read Teilhard and he kind of has this language that blankets all of it. And ever since really discovering him and his thought, it's given me then a language that I can use to not just try and communicate these ideas to people, but to connect these ideas with people where there's a resonance there. And I'm not by any means the authority on Teilhard de Chardin. There are so many people out there that have come and gone that have been so much brighter than me on him and his thoughts and vision and everything. But the just the vast sea of knowledge that we are exposed to through others being able to share their experience when it comes to maybe working with his thought or a similar concept has been so enriching and so enlightening for me, where I just continue to seek the others, so to speak, and people that have a like mind and a like heart when it comes to looking at our spiritual growth in an evolutionary context.
What is your experience with psychedelics?
Well, when it came up recently with a friend who is also a theologian, my response was, "How do you think I got into this business of being a theologian?" I think just you're kind of young and naturally inquisitive about the nature of reality, at least, I am. And it's it is in so many ways a doorway to getting a fuller sense of maybe what's out there in terms of the phenomenology of your own experience. You read what other people write about. And for me, early on, it was really reading about the ecstatic visions of saints and sages and prophets and things like that. And this heavy Old Testament imagery that's now interestingly being like used as a backdrop for a lot of extraterrestrial and UAP and non-human intelligence phenomenon, right? And that's a whole nother conversation to have. But like that really like what was kind of like the dazzling flashes that made me interested in pursuing my spiritual growth more. But I have just found like over the years, and this is probably large part to like having a family or raising children, working with other family members, aging parents, grandparents, all these things. It's just it's it's less about that ecstatic, rapturous, mystical experience, and it's more about the common mysticism that we find in the love that people share,
Hmm.
particularly the incredibly selfless love that some people are able to share. That's really what like moves me more now and is more inquisitive to me more now than what had initially gotten me into this field and psychedelics and stuff like that. I mean, I still very much believe they have their place and purpose. And I even, we could talk about this more if you want, but I could foresee um, it having a more institutionalized place, maybe many years in the future within organized religions. Um, but yeah, very grateful for their presence and um, pray that they are as healing for other people as they were for me.
It's a really, really interesting uh, kind of future predict there. The concept of psychedelics once again being a part of larger organized religion because they've been a part of ancient worship all over the world for time immemorial, right? And when you are reading these biblical passages, you go, gosh, this seems oddly conscious changing here. This vision, this idea, this concept. And you look at it and you go, I think there's something being left out here about
Mhm.
what is actually being talked about. The very, very powerful visions people have had that have been formative in the stories that we've all learned about the nature of God from the Old and New Testament and so forth. But then when you kind of look at them after you've had a few psychedelic experiences or even just one, and you look at it and you go, you know what? I think the whole thing has shifted for me in actually a much more resonant and I can relate to it more kind of way. And you read these stories and you go, oh, I think I understand this a little bit more. And I had intentionally left out any discussion of psychedelics, which I talk about all the time with you because I wasn't sure if you were somebody who would speak about that sort of thing. But it is interesting for you that at the very least it provided a doorway for you to have an experience that connected you with a higher spirit, a real living God, whatever it was that was profound enough to set you on course and go, this is real. This is
Yeah.
all very real.
Hmm.
And your practice now, is what it is. But that was a major doorway for you. That was a life changer.
Yeah, and yeah. I mean, it is worth, punching the card to remain a card carrying member or paying your dues to remain a card carrying member of the society too, right? I guess, as I heard Ram Dass once put it, it just maybe gets a little bit more challenging as you take on more responsibilities and stuff like that. But I certainly believe it has its place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do people get in touch with you?
Sure. So you can find me on Instagram is probably where I'm most active on social media. My handle there is earth underscore psyche underscore spirit. And you can also catch me on my website, which is andrewdelrossi.com. And I just have a list of upcoming dates and programs that I'll be leading or participating in coming up there. We've got a nice grouping of programs and presentations coming along for 2025. So I'm really excited and looking forward to this year. I'm also on Twitter too, but if you connect with me on Instagram, that's the good jumping off point to find all of my channels.
Excellent. We'll have all of those linked in the bio. And here's the portion of the show where I tell you what I love about you. And what I love about you, we haven't talked about, is that many, many years ago, you and I met at Asilomar because we were at a symposium on transpersonal psychology. And we sat and we ate together, and you gave me your business card. And there was just something about you. And I kept that business card for what is closer to 10 years now. And that's why I contacted you because you were so compassionate, so interesting, so careful, um, so introspective that there was something about that conversation that I never really forgot. The way in which that you speak of all of these high-minded ideas is with a sense of deep humility and compassion and care because this is not just simply about synthesizing information so that you can write a really great leather-bound book for other people with long beards to read.
Hmm.
It's about bringing this knowledge that is relevant to everybody's daily life to a world that is spiritually impoverished, a world that is starved for something inspiring. And you run a space that is for the enlightenment of people. It's for people who are beat up, people who are sad, people who are excited, people who are going through all sorts of different spaces of the human experience to come and connect deeply with something higher than just simply themselves. And that you do it with such a sense of duty and mission and compassion for the people that you serve. And that there's such a sense of real mission in it for you. And I love the way that you speak about it. I love your kind of ability to switch from the contemporary to the academic and back. And I'm just really excited that I got a chance to have a second conversation with you here.
Jeremy, thank you so much. That's um, terrifyingly humbling. Thank you so much. I really am affirmed and very grateful for you reaching out and for us being able to have this second conversation. It's really been life-giving for me, and I pray that it's life-giving for others as well.
Thank you so much. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the Mindful Mutiny podcast. And remember, in a lifetime, there are more decisions than anybody can count. Living the highest form of yourself is the most rewarding thing that you can do. Make incredible, positive, risky, and bold decisions to be the highest version of you. Now go be something great.